I am your host, Benjamin Richard, and we had the chance for this episode to talk with Bob Beaudry, a veteran and a supporting figure in the veteran community who also had a chance to participate in the 2023 Invictus Games in Düsseldorf. Hi Bob, how are you doing?
I'm good, Ben. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Can you tell us what it is being a soldier, being deployed in different places?
I think the hardest part about being a deployment is leaving the families behind. We go into an operational environment. It could be combat, it could be peacekeeping, it could be peacemaking. The deployments are normally 6 months long, and we normally train 3 to 4 months prior to that deployment. So you're actually gone for close to 9 months for every deployment.
That's very long. What do you see in terms of injuries from people being deployed mentally or physically?
Well, there's two sides of it. The physical injuries are quite easy to see, and some can be catastrophic and others can be minor. We have lost soldiers on deployments and operational situations, and I've also seen people return to Canada from a deployment because they broke their leg playing ball hockey in their time off. So there's operational injuries and there's non-operational injuries. The mental injuries don't always happen right away on a deployment. For some people they do. Other people it doesn't really take effect until months after they're back home.
And is there support during the deployment for those psychological injuries?
There is. We have social workers and psychiatrists that are deployed as well. We also have doctors, nurses, physician's assistants, as well as med techs. There's a lot of medical support on deployments. But like I mentioned before, the injury, when it's mental, it normally comes after the fact. Because when you're on a deployment, there's adrenaline running through you. Mm-hmm. You're doing what you were trained months and months, years sometimes, to become or to actually be deployed, and your whole focus is on that deployment. So when you actually go back home, it's kind of like you slow down, and that's when the mental injuries start coming up as it starts affecting the soldiers. And
what kind of mental injuries do you see?
Well, there's some mental injuries. I guess the big one is post-traumatic stress disorder, but we have a term called OCISS, or operational stress injuries. With that, that's an umbrella term, and under that, PTSD is one. Moral injury is another. You could have depression, anxiety. There's a lot of sexual assault. All those fall under the operational stress injury umbrella. And a lot of times, if there's an incident, there's an immediate debriefing afterwards within 24 hours to try and help the soldiers cope with a major incident that happened.
And we talked about the support during the deployment. What is there for support after the deployment to treat those?
Well, after deployment is, we always do a post-deployment medical, and it's during that time you have to self-disclose. And because doctors are not mind readers, if you don't tell them you're having mental issues, there's really no way they're going to be able to tell. Mm-hmm. So the onus is a lot on the soldier. Unfortunately, a lot of soldiers think or believe there may be career implications, and sometimes there are, if they come forth with a mental health injury. So some soldiers stay quiet, and they don't bring it forward, and they basically hide, keep the injury to themselves. And so basically at work, nobody knows. At home, the family normally knows.
And last year you told us that you worked with OCISS. Can you tell us what it is? Do you still work for them?
I'm not with OCISS anymore, but when I was working with OCISS, it stands for Operational Stress Injury Social Support. So OCISS is an organization that belongs to the transition units across the Canadian Forces. So when a lot of people are being medically released, they get posted to the transition unit. And they're introduced to OCISS, and OCISS, it would be like I would be supporting people through my own lived experiences, like what I learned to help with my day-to-day coping mechanisms so that I can actually function to the best that I can, and I try and help the other soldiers the same based on my own experience. Yeah. It's a lot of things. We go out for coffee, get them out in subject talking, and they could talk just like we're talking right now. Yeah. And basically the soldier starts feeling, say, hey, I'm not the only person that's injured like this. Bob is injured too, and he seems fine. If Bob can do it, maybe I can do it.
So Remembrance Day was created to honor those who fought for our country, and the day itself is related to the end of the First World War, but there has been many wars since then, and there's some younger veterans also. What is there to support those younger veterans?
The best support for the younger veterans today is the senior leadership within the Canadian Forces. As part of being a leader, you have to know your soldiers and promote their welfare. It's one of the basic principles of leadership. And you have to always be looking out for your soldiers. If your soldier comes back at deployment, you have to pay attention to them. And normally a close-knit group can actually detect if somebody is having issues, and the supervisor should actually talk to the person and say, you know, like, hey, Ben, are you okay? Like, I've noticed that, you know, you've been coming in late a lot, or I notice you're a lot of anger a lot. Is there something happening? And we have that. We also have, every base has a medical clinic, and which is, again, filled with doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, psychologists, and those are always available for all members of the Canadian Armed Forces. And today, unlike yesterday, when I was initially diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, it's basically the end of your career. Today, people can function quite highly with post-traumatic stress disorder if it's caught early enough and they receive the proper treatment. So today, the younger soldiers are set up more for success than yesterday's soldiers were.
And is there financial aid for those who may not be able to function in the workplace?
If somebody cannot function in the workplace as a result of a deployment, they would normally eventually be medically released. And for example, we have Veterans Affairs Canada that will financially support a veteran that has post-traumatic stress. Different people have different levels. It's not everyone has the same level of post-traumatic stress. So Veterans Affairs assigns a percentage anywhere from, let's say, 0 to 100%. And you could have one soldier who's at 25% and another soldier is at 50%. And based on your percentage will determine how much financial support you get. The higher the percentage, the higher the financial support there will be.
Is there a message you would like to give to people that have suffered during deployment?
Well, the one thing I could say is don't keep things inside. We all are afraid to speak up because we're worried that it's going to have an impact on our career. Talking about it, that's how you start healing. It's like anything you hear, like if you keep it all inside, eventually you're going to explode. It's the same sort of thing. Once we talk more and more, you somewhat normalize whatever the injury will be. Initially for me, I used to never told anyone that I had post-traumatic stress disorder. The more I said it, the more comfortable it became. And now it's a part of my everyday vocabulary. Mm.
And now that you're open to talking about how you suffered during deployment, there's of course others, and there is, I've heard, Invictus Games that let people like that compete and learn how to rehabilitate in sports and competition and with their bodies. Can you tell us a bit about what is the Invictus Games?
Certainly. The Invictus Games were created by Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. When he initially was in the United States and he's seen the Americans have this program called the Warrior Games. It's much smaller than the Invictus Games, but it's somewhat the same, where you compete through sport. And once he's seen that, he thought, I need something bigger than this, or we should have something bigger than this on a world stage, not just for one country. So there, he created the Invictus Games. And the Invictus Games right now, they're celebrating their 10th anniversary for 10 years. And this year's the games are actually being held here in Canada.
And are you planning on going to these games?
Yes. I was a competitor last year at the games in Dusseldorf in 2023. And it was a life-changing experience, not only for me, but for my family. I have a daughter of mine that came to the games, and she was so inspired by the games that she joined the military.
Oh, wow.
And she's now a military member, so it was a proud moment for me. The Invictus Games are not only for people with mental injuries, but there's physical injuries too, and some you can't see, like somebody with MS, it's hard to tell that there's anything wrong with them. So there's a lot of hidden injuries behind these. And the Invictus Games is all about recovery through sport and camaraderie. And when you are a member or part of the Invictus Games, you're representing your country again. And so I was so inspired by the games, I decided I want to volunteer. So I applied to volunteer for the Invictus Games 2025 that are being held in Vancouver and Whistler, BC, in February. So I applied to be a volunteer, and I got accepted as a volunteer. And I'll be working in the Operations Center in Vancouver for the Invictus Games, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing the games from the other side and being able to help at the same time.
That's great. How was the Invictus Games in Düsseldorf?
The Invictus Games in Düsseldorf, it started off stepping on the stage. There's 25,000 people just celebrating Canada. When they announce Canada and you come out on that stage and you look up, it's very humbling to see that many people cheering you on. I was extremely busy during the games. I didn't have much time for any tourism sort of thing during the games. I was more focused on competing. But the Invictus Games, for me, not just at the games, but the 9 months prior, I started training for the games. Okay. And so that there started with the mental and physical recovery for me. I'm not 100% cured, of course, but as long as the intention is to continue recovery through sport. That's what the Invictus Games are really all about.
And what sports did you participate in?
I participated in swimming. I did the backstroke, the front crawl, and the breaststroke. And I also competed in archery, and I also competed in wheelchair rugby.
Okay. Did you play those sports before, or was that a challenge?
I never did archery before or wheelchair rugby before. Of course, I swam, but never competitively. Yeah. I never took swimming lessons in my life. So it showed in the games. Yeah. Like, I think I came in last place in almost every race I did, but yeah. I think I got the loudest cheers, because it doesn't matter whether you won the race or you lost the race. People were cheering you and supporting you regardless, because it's not about winning. It's about going through the motions, the recovery through sport. Like, just showing up. Yeah. The archery I'd never done before, and wheelchair rugby I definitely didn't do before. But I got to I got to practice with a local club here in Ottawa called the Ottawa Stingers. Okay. And the gentleman that runs that, he actually competed at the Paralympic Games this year that were in Paris, France.
So who went with you to the Invictus Games in Düsseldorf?
My wife went with me, 2 of my daughters went with me, as well as my mother-in-law. And it was very nice to have them there, to have the family support. And the Invictus Games, you feel like a professional athlete. And to have your family be able to witness this type of an environment it's amazing, because it's not something I wanted to go through alone. I wanted to be able to share it with my family. And I got to do that. Some people went there by themselves. The majority of the people went there with families or friends.
That's really cool. So Remembrance Day is coming up on the 11th of November. Do you have any plans for Remembrance Day?
Well, this year's Remembrance Day is a little special to me because, as I mentioned earlier, I have a daughter that joined the military. So now I will be able to attend a Remembrance Day ceremony with my daughter in uniform. It'll be the first time ever. Before it was always me in uniform and her in civilian attire. Now it's going to be reversed. Okay. She'll be in uniform and I'll be in civilian attire. I've never been to the National War Monument for Remembrance Day. The crowd is just way too much for me. In the past, a lot of times I would either just go to my children's schools to celebrate with the school, or I would watch the ceremony on television. It's a lot easier for the crowds and anxiety and all that sort of thing. However, last year I went to Beechwood Cemetery for the first time, and that was a very nice service. And I don't know if I plan on attending Beechwood again this year or not. There is a couple of options. I could go to a Legion to attend one of their ceremonies. Most of the times just right here in Rockland. I go to the ceremony here in Rockland. I want to support my local community. So the majority of the times I go to the ceremony here in Rockland.
Well, thank you very much, Bob Beaudry, to be here today with us.
Thank you, Ben. It was my pleasure.